webinar. The topic is emergency measures to protect whistleblowers and promote reporting during the anti-corruption and integrity. Become one of the most well-known global convening event for the anti-corruption and integrity world. So, of course, this year with the COVID-19 crisis, we have had to adjust the way we do it and look at new ways to hold this very important session. So this webinar is part of this effort, the Global Anti-Corruption Integrity Forum webinar series. This series aims to continue sharing knowledge, expertise, experience, etc. in today's changing environment and bringing together the public, the private, and also civil society actors. We have seen with the current COVID-19 crisis that it has impacted us all, that's for sure. And in dealing with this crisis and in mitigating its impact, we've had to revisit our toolbox to see if our tools remain fit for purpose. And this is particularly true for combating corruption risks, which is exacerbated in terms of corruption in some of the most critical sectors, in particular in health and pharmaceutical. So effective whistleblower protection are one of the most important tools we have in our toolbox for ensuring that corruption does not derail our COVID response and our recovery efforts. In these times, of course, we see that the procurement from governments, for example, is done in urgency. That means that transparency is not always where it should be, as well as accountability. So it's even more important that we ensure that whistleblowers are reporting. That means that we need to protect them. So one of the many valuable lessons learned from this pandemic will be that we need the whistleblowers. It's kind of the first line of protection in terms of corruption, and we need thus to protect them. And as the current crisis showed, every time a whistleblower is silenced, the risk to public health and safety increases proportionately, or even more than proportionately. So the most advanced whistleblower protection laws allow whistleblowers to report directly to the public or to the media in cases of danger to public health or safety. And of course, never then has this exception to requirements for internal or tiered reporting been more important than in the current context. Today, we are very honored to have 5 distinguished experts to help us unpack these challenges and possible response. We have Eline Backlid-Koens, an expert in medical coding compliance, whose first-hand experience with whistleblowing testifies to the need for effective whistleblower protection in the healthcare sector. We have Tom Devine, legal director of the Government Accountability Project, the US leading whistleblower protection advocacy organization. We have Lisette van Inenlam, the Group Chief Integrity Officer at ABB Group. We have Inese Kruška at the State Chancellery in Latvia, who is spearheading the whistleblower protection legislation in Latvia. And last but not least, we have Khadija Sharife, Africa editor of the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project and administrator of the platform to protect whistleblowers in Africa. So we have a fantastic panel joining us from South Africa, from the US, from Latvia, etc. That's one of the good aspects of this crisis. And our discussion will be divided into 3 rounds of questions with the panelists, followed by Q&A session with the audience. We will try also during these 3 rounds of questions to answer some questions from the audience. So please use the chat function in the Zoom to ask your questions. And we have 2 forum team members that will be moderating the chat. We'll try to answer, of course, as many questions as possible within the time limit. And we will also have 3 polls, in fact, and one right now that you can, Rania, please begin to show on the screen. So you will see these polls on your screens. Please select an answer, submit this answer so that we'll have a good test to see where we come from. today. So the question for the first poll is, in the context of the current global health and economic crisis, and taking into account the legal protections afforded to you in your country or by your employer, would you report misconduct or danger to public health and safety if you came across it? So you have two answers, yes or no. Please submit answer and then submit your answer so that we could see very soon the result of this poll and see where we stand in terms of the readiness of at least this audience to report misconduct. And my view is that this audience should be more ready than general, public to report, because you should be more aware and interested by the question of corruption. But we'll see where we are. So I will give you 1 additional minute to answer the poll. So Rania, could you please give us the results from this audience where 72 people are ready to report misconduct or corruption, and only 30% are not ready to do so in the current crisis. My reading of this poll is that we have a very knowledgeable and competent and motivated audience. I'm not sure this would reflect the answer from the general public, but it's interesting to know. So let's go no more a little bit deeper in the discussion, and I will begin to ask questions to our panelists. First to Eileen. Eileen, in 2009, after working for more than 20 years in Halifax Health Systems, you detected a fraud and you decided to become a whistleblower, to file a False Claims Act lawsuit. Could you please share with us your experience in doing so and the reasons that led you to blow the whistle? And did being in a country with an advanced whistleblower protection legislation help you to take this decision to blow the whistle? Please, Eileen, you have the floor.
Thank you, and good morning, everyone, or good afternoon in Europe, and thank you for including me in this great panel. I'm humbled, as I'm not an expert in ethics. I am, however, a whistleblower, and while I was a former director of physician services, I'm never going to be a former whistleblower. It's one of these things where once you blow the whistle, you're a whistleblower. Even years later, you can't say you're a former whistleblower because it doesn't go away. So just something to consider when you make that step. I'm extremely passionate about whistleblower protection, as I know what it's like to be shunned at work and in your community for speaking up and doing the right thing. So my experience, I was director of physician services for a large healthcare system in Daytona Beach, Florida, and I still live in the community, which makes it very difficult. My background is in healthcare finance and compliance, and I blew the whistle on fraud to the government. I was very reluctant to do this because I knew our culture and the retaliation I would face because I had been there for 20 years. Hospital care was not the issue. The case was about exposing policies that may encourage unnecessary treatment and drain the federal healthcare system of money which could otherwise be used to help those truly in need. So our specific fraud was paying physicians for referral to the hospital, for example, incentivizing them to admit more patients or maybe use less expensive drugs. And the physician contracts that I was responsible for as a director violated the US Stark Law, which is a strict liability law that aims to eliminate conflict of interest in medicine, in which doctors refer patients for financial gain rather than medical need. And we were also paying physicians above fair market value for certain specialties that we refer to as rock stars. And other issues relating that fall under that would be using nurses to perform physician services and billing for that, upcoding, and the US system, of course, is a lot different than in Europe since our coding system is used for reimbursement. And there was also, I had allegations of unnecessary surgeries that was also part of the case. And we had a great compliance program on paper. That's why having policies and great compliance is not always enough. I reported the fraud internally for over a year. And I was told that my loyalty should be to the hospital and not the government. And if I even considered blowing the whistle, I needed to leave right away. So I did everything I could to stop the fraud. The case lasted 5 years and ended with the hospital paying $86 million in penalties and almost $40 million in legal fees. And also they were charged with sanctions for destroying medical records. And it's considered a successful case because of the large reward that was given to myself and the attorneys. But to me, it's very bittersweet because the executives that was responsible for all of this, none of them lost their jobs. Some of them got promotions because I continued to work. I was even in a meeting after the settlement where our executives were applauded because it was only $86 million when we originally were on the hook for $1 billion. So that's what's bittersweet for me is it was a cost of doing business for them. So that's like the quick version.
Okay, thank you, Eileen. Yeah, it shows that, as you say, policies and processes are not enough. And even when you blow the whistle, then the results could be not fully satisfactory. That's for sure.
Yeah, and the other thing to add to that, we talk about retaliation, and you know, even though the United States has great laws, and I will say that the second part of your question, being in a country with these great laws, did help me when I filed this whistleblower lawsuit. And I'm supposed to be protected for retaliation, but know that that's a protection on paper. Anytime you complain about a retaliation, you're going to be told it's my perception that I'm being retaliated against. So that's why paper versus actual is a lot different. So yeah, it did make a difference that I knew what law to file this under, because a lot of false claims cases in the United States actually start out as employment, but because I worked in the field and taught compliance, I knew exactly what to do. So sorry, that's it.
Yeah, so in spite of that, it's quite difficult. So can you imagine being somebody maybe less knowledgeable in a country with no whistleblower protection or with weak whistleblower protection? The situation could be really dramatic. So now I will have a question for Inese from Latvia. Inese, it has been 1 year since you have a whistleblowing protection law in Latvia. And within this year, how was consistent implementation throughout the public and the private sector ensured? And what have been the most important challenges to this implementation? Have you seen already any immediate impact on whistleblowing de facto or not? Inese, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mathilde, and thank you, Ellen, for a very inspiring first presentation. I will speak about the paper.
Yeah.
Paper can accept everything, but I will talk about practice as well, as I have been privileged to meet and talk to a lot of whistleblowers in Latvia over the last year. And probably that's the first answer to your question, that there are quite many whistleblowers coming up. But let me start by saying that the first important gain in our country was that the clear legal basis was established. First time I have a special law, whistleblowing law. It came into force in May last year. And it is our legal basis to promote whistleblowing for establishment and operation of whistleblowing channels and due protection of whistleblowers. And the law is covering both public and private sector. And it clearly sets out what does it mean, whistleblower, by giving 4 criteria. It's a natural person, cannot be a legal person, reports about possible violation, a violation that can harm the public interests, and this information provided is obtained in the context of work-related activities. As a result of this law, safe and autonomous reporting channels have been established in competent public institutions, but also in the private sector when there are more than 50 employees. Moreover, a contact point for whistleblowers has been established as of May last year in the State Chancery, and this is where I work. And our role is to be the central and coordinating structure for implementing this law. The main challenges that we identified last year, and I think they're all still valid, first of all, is the reluctance towards reporting and lack of trust that reports will be properly reviewed and the reported problem will be solved. The second challenge is organizational culture. Often whistleblowing is not tolerated, and whistleblowers are not respected by colleagues or managers. The third problem is reprisal. There will always be risk of reprisal, and keeping identity confidential is very important and very challenging as well. And the last challenge is effective investigation. The ultimate goal of any whistleblower is that the problem is solved. And we should now respond to this report, and it's not always obvious. And so with these challenges in mind, our implementation went in two directions: communication and support and guidance. So communication, we had a I think, quite successful campaign. It's called See, Hear, Speak Up. It's based here, you probably can see one of our posters on some key messages. This one was about rotten fruit. So if you see on your table a rotten fruit, you naturally want to throw it away. Or if another symbol was broken chair, you have a broken chair in the room, you just take it out. So the same natural reaction should be when you see violation in your workplace. You just have to do something about it. So the campaign called See, Hear, Speak Up was conducted around the country for about 6 months. We also created a central web platform for citizens and authorities, Trauksmes cēlējs LV, so Whistleblower LV. It's a practical tool where there's information in a very simple manner. What is whistleblowing, what protection guarantees are available, but it's also where you have a list of all competent authorities, about 160 authorities, what you can report them about, who is the contact person for whistleblowing, and what is the way you can report this authority. And it's a searchable database. Finally, this website also provides the opportunity to report online, and the report is directed to the competent authority. So once again, I think the main impact immediate of this law is that these channels have been created. They are all listed on this website. You can contact the designated persons. The channels are separate from other business of the competent authority. And so the whistleblowers can come forward with the report in a more easier way than before. So our first annual report was released recently. So in 2019, we have altogether received 435 disclosures using whistleblowing channels in public sector. From these 119 reports, or more or less each fourth report, corresponded to a whistleblower law and prompted an investigation. And review of 65 of these reports was completed last year. Main results: administrative violations, in few cases also criminal, and I guess 2 cases disciplinary proceedings. But in some cases, the most important was not to punish somebody, but improvements were made. The main areas of reports were the 2 institutions that received most of the reports was our corruption authority and the State Revenue Service, about different violations of tax payments, but also inspections like labor, public procurement, environment, construction, education. So thank you.
Thank you, Ines. Now I have a question for Lisette. From a corporate perspective, is there increased attention to the role of whistleblowers as a form of internal control mechanism? And are you seeing an increase in efforts from the corporate sector to facilitate reporting and to protect those who do so?
Thank you, Mathilde, and thank you to the OECD for inviting me for this session. I think when you're looking at it from a corporate perspective, and ABB's industry, so we're not government, we're not pharma, we're in a different way looking at whistleblowers. We even don't really call them whistleblowers. And when you're talking about public interest, that's also something that from a corporate perspective is viewed a bit in a different way. In ABB, we call people that raise concerns reporters. But I guess if you would, weigh them on the scale of how they are viewed, it's the same thing. As a Chief Integrity Officer, I'm very focused in my program at looking at how I can best raise the awareness to our employees to report matters to our whistleblower hotline, and also increase, of course, the messaging on non-retaliation. And within ABB, we've been preaching this message for over 10 years. So we have a bit of experience. And I think, Inesu, what you said about organizational culture is something that's very important. I think, how you are viewed as an integrity organization or a compliance organization by your employees is extremely important. And I think, commending Elin for her courage to step up in an organization that didn't quite view that or give that confidence to its employees yet is something that's makes all the difference. I think the whistleblowers or reporters are the best way for your organization to really have a good sense of the pulse in your organization of what's going on. And you can only look at numbers for so much. They only tell part of the story. And now that we're becoming more data-driven in our reviews and investigations with analytics and e-discovery and all these beautiful tools that we have, I think it's important that we don't misunderstand or misjudge the value of the human factor, of the intention behind numbers, the intention of how rules are viewed or certain of them are circumvented, perhaps. And I think, therefore, it's very important that whistleblowing and retaliation is also treated just as much with that human value and not treated with a kind of a more of a corporate strategy view on it. It's really a human thing. Therefore, I think it's incredibly important in organization to have support from the top level, really the senior management, to have that message that non-retaliation is really a no-go, will not be condoned, and that there is a strong emphasis on making sure that everything's properly investigated and that discipline follows for the actors that have been involved in wrongdoing. So overall, I think it's incredibly important. Do we see an increase at the moment? I think when we're talking about the COVID-19 situation, I wouldn't specifically call it an increase. We have a whistleblower hotline that is broadly used and broadly trusted by most of our employees, I would say. And in that case, the current situation just emphasizes people to come to us when they have a concern regarding the current situation. But I haven't noticed a decrease in reportings because people are in a different environment and they may see less because they see their colleagues less. The strength of the reporting is still there, and the strength of the reaction from my team is also just as much on the same level. I just think that from a perspective of internal whistleblowers and reporters to concerns, it's important to react instantly without delay, and to make sure that you provide feedback to that reporter, that you're onto it and that you're reviewing it and that you're taking it serious, that it may take some time to close the entire investigation, but that you will remain in touch and that you also consider the information that is being brought to you by the whistleblower. So I think that's the position from my side with regards to reporting in a company like ABB.
Sorry, I have a slight cut in my connection. I hope you can hear me now. to Tom Divine in these times of crisis. And the question is how to make a difference that is becoming crucial between good faith reporting and somehow fake news or disinformation, in particular regarding healthcare procurement. So Tom, could you answer on this one? Oops.
I'm sorry. The query that I had is how this crisis is affecting whistleblowers and the risk to them from taking these initiatives. And, you know, in my experience, been doing this for over 40 years, there's a direct linear relationship between the stakes of the whistleblowing and the risk to the person who's exposing some abuse of power. Generally, institutions are pretty tolerant of whistleblowing that's more like background noise. But if it's going to be a fundamental threat, it can be an act of professional suicide. And with this COVID-19 crisis, the stakes have never been higher for whistleblowers. And to me, that's kind of given us a couple of lessons learned about why people should take these risks. The first is that, you know, now more than ever, you know, truth is the best medicine to this pandemic and any future public health crises. And the second lesson is that disinformation is now a clear and present danger to public health or safety. It's not just a matter of cooking the books or something like that. And that kind of leads to a third lesson to me, which is we can't compartmentalize whistleblower rights anymore. Martin Jefflin made a comment that from Eurocadre, which was the hub of advocacy for the European Union Whistleblower Directive, that the new directive doesn't cover occupational safety. But occupational safety isn't just a personal matter anymore. If we violate occupational safety laws, we're creating carriers for public health and safety threats. Freedom of speech, the impact of it during this crisis cannot be compartmentalized. And I would just like to, kind of as a PS, share with folks that if you were impressed by Eileen's presentation, as I always am, you can learn a lot more about her with an in-depth view of her story in a book called Crisis of Conscience, Whistleblowing the Age of Fraud by Tom Mueller. It has very in-depth presentation of her story and all sorts of other whistleblowers, and it gives a great understanding of what people are taking on when they decide to commit the truth.
And may I ask a follow-up question, Tom? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
okay. Yes, okay, sorry. I would like to ask a question about how to make the difference in this time of crisis, and that's a question that comes from the audience, how to make the difference between a good faith complaint or reporting and something that would be more like fake news or disinformation, and especially in terms of healthcare, procurement, etc. It's quite critical these days. So how would you proceed to make the difference?
Well, I'll tell you how we do it at the Government Accountability Project. The equivalent is putting the person who wants to blow the whistle through like a whistleblower boot camp. We tell them, we're very interested in the issues that you raised, and if you're going to have an impact, this is going to be the hardest sell of your life because you're going to be challenging actions by people who have a lot more access to resources and have a lot more power than you. And if you blow the whistle and you're not successful, it's going to be a lose-lose in every direction. Your own life will be shattered, and the people who are abusing their power will be stronger in the aftermath of having defeated your challenge. So it'd be better to remain silent unless we know you can have an impact. And so we're going to challenge you from every way possible. When you can pass all of our tests, you can graduate, and we'll go public with this information. And the whistleblowers who are in good faith, they don't just turn in their assignments to me. They give me extra credit. They're so happy. Somebody will listen to them. We get a lot of evidence. The ones who are playing games, they drop out of school because they don't have the information, and they realize they're wasting their time trying to get somebody to echo what they can't prove.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I would like to turn to Khadija and to ask her a question related to the very specific situation we are with all these lockdown measures around the planet, and also with the global quarantine measures, etc. So do you think that these things have reduced access to information and have impacted negatively reporting? Or do you think that this has led to different new ways of reporting? Or it has led us to rethink the way reports are received and are addressed? So how this current situation is affecting the reporting in terms of quantity, quality, and the way it is done? Thanks, Khadija.
Thank you so much for having me. I apologize that my camera is not working. We have a slow internet connection. What we've learned from cross-border investigative journalism, especially during the time of COVID, but also historical practices, that whistleblowers are on the front line and they are living evidence. Their power is immense, but it's also limited to detection and disclosure. And like everything else, they are now under lockdown. So in detecting, they become have been fast-tracked, are speeded up, and are adapting. But in theory, a lot of the times corruptivity works transnationally, and criminals and corrupt politicians outsource and use systems, whether it's encrypted software to foreign banking secrecy and tax havens, that domestic laws and law enforcement cannot easily penetrate. In Africa, at least, whistleblowing is a juridical process. It's reliant on limited national laws, which is very different from being a source to a journalist. A source can obtain and expose information, and the journalist can protect the source under the guise of the public interest. But if you are a whistleblower, you may face bankruptcy, labor discrimination, civil and criminal litigation, exorbitant legal costs. You know, your recognition, even under a law of an employee. I think only 1 or 2 countries in the world, big bodies, even where they appear autonomous, can be politically captured, or they can investigate secretly and at their discretion. And even variations of whistleblowing where laws exist may not be recognized. For example, in South Africa, a whistleblower from the Public Investment Corporation was providing the police with information at their request, but he was not recognized as a whistleblower and he has no legal protection. So very often certain things are outside of the legal process. Many African countries have no laws, or the laws are so precarious that it's almost like putting a target on your back that doesn't make sense. And so we find that whistleblowers, especially under lockdown, prefer to go to investigative media or to civil society and corruption NGOs, because they trust civil society much more than they trust the political regimes at bay. So we know that prior to COVID, the world was deeply corrupt. The continent loses at least $150 billion each year that should be invested in health and education, water and waste sanitation. Instead, this lockdown has not only enhanced existing corruption and corruption, but it's given space and place to new opportunities to repurpose and to expand. But it also gives us, as civil society, the opportunity to change the system. If governments develop transnational frameworks to protect whistleblowers, which means that even if your country is corrupt, you still have an international system to apply to, if whistleblowers can be given political asylum, if a fund can be developed to support investigative journalism, for example, where a whistleblower needs to be relocated, as in the case of a great Gambia story, we had to relocate the whistleblower several months before the investigation was launched. So if there was a fund to support and sustain not only the cases, but also the whistleblowers who will be disempowered, unemployed, blackballed, and psychologically, financially, and professionally ruined, I mean, forever and ever, this is their identity. That would go a long way with this information. And each case is a question of intelligence or national security. Therefore, it cannot be handled to do this. I mean, for corruption, yes, fish rock scandal involving whistleblowing is all intertwined. So it's pushing for access to information, media freedom laws, whistleblower protection laws, and so forth. So it's part of a bigger dialogue, but we've seen that whistleblowers really are the canaries, especially under lockdown. And they are the litmus test of what happens and how fair a society is when this kind of corruption and secrecy and oppression is ramped up, as we've seen with lockdowns.
Protection that is provided, and in the current context with the crisis, because of the consequences in terms of public health, because of what is at stake, do you think that more people in general would feel compelled to report, or to the contrary? Because for example, what Khadija explained, because of how much vulnerable people are in this crisis, and especially the vulnerable groups, they have already high risk to lose their jobs, etc. They would be less likely to report. So, what would be your view, and how this depend on the context? Eileen, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. So,
yes.
I would like to say yes to that question, but in my personal experience of being a whistleblower in healthcare, I don't think more people will come forward until society accepts that whistleblowing is the right thing to do. And I'll know that has happened when whistleblowers can go out and get a job with another company, that companies would actually hire whistleblowers. Until I see that, I don't think anything will change. So you have to remember, while I think more people would report wrongdoing with the stakes these highs, you have to remember, though, that once you blow the whistle, your label as a whistleblower will be with you forever. You'll be called a disgruntled employee. You're going to be blacklisted in your industry, and it's impossible for you to get another job. And these are the things you have to think of before you blow the whistle. And in my particular case, I had thought about this for so long that I finally didn't care anymore, because I couldn't live with what was going on, that I just didn't care if I lost anything. And I think once you get to that point, you will blow the whistle. Talking about healthcare, though, my case included allegations of unnecessary surgeries. And this is a very difficult subject. Rather than focusing on the issue and investigating, the focus was turned to me and the fact that I made this allegation, not being a physician. And because during the audits, I made these allegations based on peer review audits that were done of our physicians, but because one of the auditing physicians that I had never known, never met, had one phone call with her, this was turned around and used against me, because I did answer the phone when she called. they said I had a personal relationship with a physician, and therefore the allegation, I had a personal relationship. That was the defense, was no, this is all about me. So everything turns to you as the disgruntled employee instead of focusing on the fact, which is very, very difficult. And knowing that, it's harder for people to come forward. And also, when you asked about the vulnerable and marginalized groups, if they are less likely to report in the current crisis, I would say absolutely yes, because their family depends on their income if they're someone working somewhere. So you have to consider the fact that you have to feed your family. One of the things in my decision making when I couldn't take it anymore is I'm a Norwegian citizen living in the US, and I thought if the retaliation got so bad that I couldn't take it anymore, I would move my family to Norway, where I'm from. However, during this crisis, you can't even travel, so you can't get away when you do this. And I live in the community where I blew the whistle. And you have to consider it doesn't just affect you, it affects your family, it affects your kids, who they go to school with, who they dance with, who they play basketball with. You have to think about all of that. It's a huge decision. And even though the stakes are high, yeah, you may help a lot of people, but if you destroy your family, that's an ethical decision you personally have to take. So unfortunately, my answer is that even with the stakes high, I don't think more people would come forward the way the current situation is. Thank you.
Sorry. Sorry, my connection doesn't work. Would like to ask the same question to the other panelists. Do you agree with the fact that in the current crisis, even if the stakes are higher, it makes definitely reporting more dangerous or the consequences more dramatic, so that there is less chance for people to report? Could you step in, the other panelists, please? Tom, for example, what do you think? Do you agree with Khadija and Eileen?
Without question, the stakes are unsurpassed in my experience. One of the worst public health whistleblower cases I'd ever worked on before had led to 50,000 people dying over a 6-year period from an unsafe pharmaceutical product. And here in the United States alone, we're approaching 100,000 in 6 months. This is extremely high stakes time. The truth has never mattered more. And I think there's a real lesson to be learned here about public freedom of expression. Bissett made the well-taken point that it's necessary to act instantly. And that's why a whistleblower has to inform the organization where they're working of any problems, so they can deal with them. But that principle applies across the board. We need public freedom of expression. We can't wait for organizations to open an internal investigation and then come up with the results and hash them out and package them and publish them. We need the truth immediately. And that's necessary so that people can protect their own families without waiting for some organization to provide them the support. Sure, they need the support from the institutions in our economy, from the government. Of course, everybody's got to do their share, but it starts with protecting your own family. And you can't do that unless you have the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that's why disinformation is so dangerous. And that's why I think another real lessons learned from this pandemic is one that's relevant for Europe. Usually I'm kind of cheerleading Europe's whistleblower rights compared to the United States, because in many respects they're stronger, but not in one, not in respect to public freedom of expression. And I think it's worth considering on the continent and anywhere. A very common model is that you can have public freedom of expression after giving the system a chance. First, you work through an internal corporate system if you're a private sector employee, and then go to the government or go to the government agencies first. And if that doesn't work out right, then you can go public after a few months or maybe 6 months or even 9 months. And you can go public sooner if you believe or you can demonstrate that the internal channels weren't going to work properly. That's very risky. It's a big question mark. You don't know. It dramatically reduces the flow of information, timely flow of information to the public when you have to process everything through these institutional channels. The US system is different. In the United States, you can go public with your whistleblowing on public health and safety threats or illegality as the rule rather than the exception immediately. You don't have to go through this filter and prove that you deserve to go public. You can go public with as long as the information, as long as the public needs the information, unless it's classified information, military secrets, of course, or it's specifically prohibited by law. There's a statute which says like privacy rights of people. Other than that, you don't have to process the truth through institutional channels. You can tell the people who are affected by it immediately. And I think as an emergency measure, that's something that all nations should be considering, at least with respect to the public health and safety threats. Don't make the whistleblowers wait to expose the truth.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, I think it's time to go to our second poll. So the second question that we have for the poll, could you put it on the screen, Rania? The second question is, do you know where to report misconduct or danger to public health and safety in your country? And there is a related question: to make a report, which of the following channels would you be more likely to use? So please answer, submit your answers, and we'll wait for 1 minute to see the results of the poll. So once you have answered the first question, where to report, then go to following or suivant. And there is a following question: to make a report, which of the following channels would you be more likely to use? Telephone, in-person, online platform, mobile reporting tool, for example, a smartphone app, or other. So Rania, could you put on, okay, the answers? So we have more than 60 people, 60% of people that know where to report, which is good already, but I think we have a slight bias in our audience, if I may. And then which type of channel would you choose? The most typical one would be online platform, 71%. So that gives us an information that is, to my view, biased, but it's interesting. So I would like now to go back to the panelists and ask one question about the current situation. And for example, Ines, could you tell us what do you think governments, what type of emergency measures could government take to provide better and more immediate protection and promote reporting of wrongdoing during this crisis? Which type of emergency measures could governments make? Ines, can you hear me?
Yes, I do. Thank you. Thank you, Mathilde. I believe that this emergency situation no doubt has some risks because there are a lot of exceptions and there is speed and quite a lot of money that is distributed. So there are risks of corruption and risks related to procurement, quality of services, etc. And there is quite a lot of discussion about it in our society. And one of our responses is openness. We have a single website for COVID-related matters for the government, and we have created, after criticism about these risks, a separate section where all the procurements are listed that are provided not using the procurement procedures, etc. So yesterday I tried to contact my colleagues in competent authorities for procurement, for health, my colleagues here at the contact point, to find out if we have received some whistleblower reports about these issues, for example, about these emergency procurements. Well, I only found out that there was a report by another bidder made about the procurement, and a couple of reports about health. But that was nothing extraordinary, or no like big significant violations reported. And otherwise, since March, we have received reports related to COVID situation. Some examples, some persons complained that they are not allowing to do remote working, that there are institutions or private organizations that don't respect the safety regulations or different restrictions that are imposed by the government. There was one report that was closer than the previous examples to whistleblowing, where a factory worker reported that there are several persons in the factory that are positive COVID, but the factory is still working. Well, that was in the beginning of the crisis, so at this stage, I believe it would have been just not possible. And with this in mind, so I don't have evidence showing that we have a lot of whistleblowers about the COVID and that they would need some extraordinary measures. So I will conclude by saying that it's very important preconditions for functioning whistleblowing systems during this crisis is the work done before. The digitalization of our governments and the remote working of government officials. So today, any whistleblower in Latvia can easily report. And if there's somebody with knowledge about problems with emergency procurement or in the health system, they can come forward with a report like they could have done before. So there's continuity of this service by the government. And also all the officials continue to work. So I think this is very important that we need to continue to have digital reporting channels for future new situations that can come up. And mostly reports actually are submitted by email. Every institution has a separate email channel, and there's our online platform. So this is all still working. Thank you.
But I would like to ask a similar question to Khadija. And because you mentioned already in your first intervention the role of the media and how it is key, because people might want to go immediately to the media, to the social media, etc. What would be the measures that you would like the governments to take to protect journalists and to promote press freedom in this current crisis situation? Khadija, can you hear me?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, I think one of the most important measures would be technology, because like money, these are very neutral tools. So it really depends on the user and the power dynamics. With COVID, we've seen enhanced surveillance tools, internet censorship, lockdowns that have increased military or police presence, controlled movements, and just the speeding up and fast tracking of public monies through a variety of different contracts, allegedly in our protection. But none of this is new. Many African countries, from the DRC to Zimbabwe, are simply ramping up previous tendencies of repression and corruption. And a lot of the times, not just corporate companies, but also criminal networks camouflaged as corporate companies set up internal channels of whistleblowings that allegedly allow for whistleblowers to disclose. But very often this becomes a form of labor discrimination against them. Employees are fired, suspended, moved into lower positions, neutralized or intimidated. But what journalists have been able to do is to use technology alongside the bravery of whistleblowers to find a way to put the truth on the public record. A lot of the times, free apps, whether it's Wicker, encrypted emails like Tutanota, encrypted online chat rooms like Jitsi, allow for communication and disclosure of information to the media that then allows for the investigation and publication of this information. And I think what we've seen with our COVID investigations and investigations during the time of COVID is people taking advantage of media collapse due to a lack of print sales, advantage of chaos, and advantage of the opportunism of politicians, criminal networks, and corporate companies. So we are seeing different techniques used in cocaine and wildlife trafficking, increased waste dumping, and of course corruption into tenders on protection equipment and so forth. So what we would encourage people to do, as well as international donors, the public and NGOs, is to promote the role of whistleblowers as well as sources and the importance of civil society and the media in putting the truth on record and building up that momentum that forces government to confront or at least act correctly in this current situation. And I think that we only need to get lucky once as journalists, whereas criminals and corrupt politicians need to get lucky every time. So the decks are stacked in our favor, and I believe that the future is ours to claim. So we should stay positive and fight as hard as we can for what we believe in, because ultimately we are the more fortunate and the stronger players in the system.
Question to Lisette. Lisette, from a company perspective, what are the main challenges for companies to ensure that there is no retaliation? And how do you do to encourage people to... Are you hearing me?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Have you heard my question?
Yes.
Okay, so please, the floor is yours.
Okay. Well, again, you know, following up on someone like Khadija, who's got, you know, so much different levels of seriousness coming at you, and it's a totally different ball game than the one I'm in, and I realize that. And also when I hear your story, Aileen, you know, it breaks my heart to see that you had to be in a situation like that. I've been in this company for 10 years, and never have I encountered any reporter or whistleblower being treated in that way. Always, you know, the aim of a company should always be to figure out the truth and wanting an ethical basis for their company and do things in the right way. Of course, I'm not saying that, you know, I'm holier than the Pope and that there's no issues, but the level of issues is definitely differently. I think if people are more encouraged to report early on, then the issues that you encounter, you know, have less space to grow into those kind of proportions that you've been dealing with. So I think to answer the question, with relation to COVID-19, we were quite quick to implement a special response task force for COVID-19 related concerns. There was a lot of corporate communication from a global level, but also on a local level, and immediate actions to support our employees. And I think that's where really our priorities were, to see, you know, keep our employees in a health and safe environment, protect their livelihoods as much as was possible, and then to make sure that our customers would still be able to, you know, keep their projects running and keep their work going, and therefore keep paying their workforce, and therefore not be part of a domino effect of people losing their jobs. So we implemented that, and we made sure that whoever, I think it's very similar to what the examples you gave, Inese, in people being worried in the workplace, people knowing, especially in the beginning, somebody had traveled from a space where there was a hotspot and they saw them in the office or in the factory and they were worried about it. Those actions, we immediately, within 24 hours, there was a response. We had someone from the task force immediately speaking to local management, making sure that if people had or needed to be separated from the workforce or quarantined, that we would support that situation without a delay. To answer the other question, as mentioned before, you have to keep raising awareness with regards to non-retaliation. And it remains very difficult when you have reports that have not a clear pinpointed retaliation. And that's something that I've had many discussions about with a lot of peer colleagues around the world. And I think therefore it's very important to do a proper investigation into retaliation reports, making sure that you balance very much in reviewing the information that you get. But you have to always support the whistleblower and the reporter no matter what. They have a feeling and a sense that they're being retaliated against, and it's your duty as a company to protect them. And that's the basis for having a proper working compliance program to start off with. In the cases, however, where you feel the retaliation report is just not accurate, which are very, very difficult situations, but then you just have to be sure that you're extremely transparent with the whistleblower about what you've looked into, why you consider that this is really not an act of retaliation, it's part of a different process or a different decision-making process. And of course, that can never be in situations where you have, these serious high-level cases such as Aileen has experienced. But if you have other cases where it's not that level of issue, but it's a lower level issue, or it's a less invasive issue where people think they have been retaliated against, but this is actually not something that you feel after doing a proper investigation is what happened. Then you have to be very transparent, and you still have to be very supportive, and you would want to be very supportive of your reporter because they've had the courage to come forward. They've had the courage to speak to you, to support you in your investigation. You can't just go back and say, hey, we looked at it, but we don't see the evidence, and that's the end of it. So still giving additional support, still providing potential opportunities for other jobs in the companies, relocation, support finding other jobs, or some kind of settlement support, whatever you can think of which is appropriate, is something that should at least be explored. I think the perception of retaliation and these false claim cases is something that does happen, and the weighing and the proportionality of how you respond with that is very precarious. I think when it comes to the larger topics, such as Khadija is reporting, and what Inese is also talking about, what businesses and industry can do is always provide a strong cooperation to authorities, making sure that if investigations touch your organization and they are reported to the authorities instead of internally, that you present the internal evidence, that you fully cooperate to find out what has happened and to support the government organizations to figure out a right way forward and to protect the whistleblowers. So I think that would be my position from a corporate perspective.
Thank you very much. I would have now a question from the audience. It's to one sense more general to the developments you just made, but somehow more focused on the current times of COVID. So the question is that the assumptions is often that once you have a report, it's fine, but this assumption obviously doesn't hold, and we have heard a lot about it already in this panel. So how to strengthen the handling of reports in COVID times? So there is this retaliation issue, but not only. And what makes this more challenging in these specific times of COVID is the COVID weakening the handling systems. So this question is to all the panelists. So if one of you wants to jump at it, please.
Maybe I can start with answer. As I mentioned, I think significantly our conditions have not changed, neither on the side of reporting persons, they can report, nor on the side of the investigators. They shall investigate, complain. There's deadlines haven't changed. The law hasn't been changed. They can work from home remotely. The only challenge I can think of and I have heard about is, for example, an inspection receives a complaint. Let's take this complaint about the factory. So they would need to go to this place and check the facts reported by the whistleblower. Yeah, that could be a challenge because they could say, because of the COVID, we cannot physically be there. So they have to kind of change the techniques of investigation. But otherwise, the obligations to follow up on the reports have not changed. And so if a serious complaint comes, we shall investigate it. That's very clear to me. The COVID shouldn't be an excuse to stop investigations.
And do the other panelists agree with you?
I think those points are well taken, and there's a few other basics that we should go back to the basics. The best way for whistleblower reports to have more impact is to enfranchise the whistleblower into the corrective action process, investigating their charges, make them an active participant in the process. When whistleblowers make their disclosure and when they don't hear anything for a few months and eventually a report comes back, but they weren't part of the process of following through on their concerns, answering the questions, calling the bluffs of those who are denying misconduct. The process is much less complete and they have a lot less impact. The other things that I think can really make a difference for them to have more impact is interpret rights, at least during the pandemic, and this is possible through the EU directive, interpret rights so that whistleblowers can have public freedom of expression immediately if their evidence deserves it, if the public needs to know this type of information. We can't wait for the truth, which is the current system of filtering through institutional channels. There's studies that have come out in the United States that just 1 week's delay in taking measures, protective measures, caused 36,000 deaths in our country. We can't wait for bureaucratic channels or good faith institutional responses. We all have to get on the job immediately when there's information that's about a public health and safety threat like this. And the other way that we can have more impact for the whistleblowers is to stop compartmentalizing their concerns. The concerns on the pandemic go across the board. And, you just consider occupational safety hazards for people working in meatpacking plants. We're turning those people who were previously victims of maybe labor abuses into carriers who are spreading the pandemic. Across the board, freedom of speech is relevant now, and it's relevant without delay. And it's not just a matter of opening your mouth. It's a matter of working with the people to follow through on their concerns.
Question from the audience that I find interesting, that is related to monetary awards. These are more or less accepted according to culture. It's a hot debate in some countries whether you should give some monetary awards to whistleblowers. So do you think that this could be adopted at least as an emergency measures, as an incentive in this specific time of COVID, where we see that the stakes are somehow higher and where we see that the risks for whistleblowers might be also higher? So would you agree that it could be a good emergency measure, specific one for the COVID crisis? Yeah, it's to all the panelists also.
Could I give you my 2 cents on that, since being that's part of the process? First of all, when people see the large money awards, they think it's like winning the lottery. They don't understand the process, and they don't understand that there's actually very few cases where there is a reward. And most whistleblowers don't come forward because they think they may get a reward because the chances are so small. I think it's less than 20%. But for me, I'm from Norway, so in my upbringing, I didn't understand why you would need a reward to do the right thing. That's where I came from when I went into this. However, my views changed after having gone through the process so drastically. Unlike a lot of US whistleblowers, I had worked there for 20 years when I left, and I continued to work afterwards. And being in retaliation for 5 years and knowing your whole career is over, I definitely feel like a reward is necessary because you lose everything. And I don't mean you need to get millions of dollars, but at least some assurance that if you can ever get a job, that company should pay you for the rest of your life. And that's just my experience, having been through what I've been, is that I think you should get a reward because the company that you work for are getting lots of money fraudulently, like in my case, and their executives are being protected. Why should you not get protection when the people that did the fraud get protection? Again, that's me changing my views after going through the process. Going into it, I didn't understand why that was even necessary. So maybe someone else can add to that.
Thank you very much. Do the other speakers agree? Yes. Would the other speakers agree with this view? Or do you think that in countries where it's not planned to have monetary awards, it could be a good kind of emergency measure?
Well, I would very much agree that the whistleblowers deserve it. I mean, for goodness sakes, they're doing work that serves the public interest. And in our economy, people are entitled to be compensated for contributing to society, and whistleblowers are too. Why should this have to be a volunteer project? At the Government Accountability Project, we have some concerns about it. However, Aileen is right that the rewards really aren't necessary for people to blow the whistle. They don't do this as a commercial operation. They do it as an act of conscience. And the concern we've had about them is so few whistleblowers actually get the awards. It's not close to 20%. It's not even 5%. That's kind of like winning the lottery if the government actually compensates you. And there's been, the studies have shown that it's increased paranoia by employers, so that there's been an increase in retaliation after these reward programs were instituted. The Government Accountability Project, our goal is to reduce retaliation. It's a tough subject, and there's good arguments in both directions.
Thank you. I think now we could go to the third question from the poll. So Rania, if you could put the poll on the screen, please. It's a poll that's a question that be asked by Latvia: should remain work-related? For example, in a hospital, a nurse would be protected for reporting a doctor's mispatient, would not be protected for making such a report. So do you think that whistleblower protection should remain work-related only? Yes or no? We'll give you maybe 20 seconds more to answer. It's easy. So maybe if you have enough answers, Rania, could you show us the result of the poll? Do we have the results now? So it's 2/3, 1/3. So 2/3 no. That means that it should not remain work-related only. That means that the patient could be able to make a report. And 1/3 say that only a nurse or somebody else working in the hospital should be able to report. So I hope, Latvia, that you have a good basis. You wanted to have this question, so that gives you an idea. Now, I would like to go back to all speakers with another question from the audience that I think is a very interesting one. How to make whistleblower more culturally acceptable? Because we see that, okay, you have the issue of retaliation, you have this discussion about monetary awards or not, but it's always It's very often a question of culture, organizational culture for sure, but also the more like general culture in one society. So what are the main measures that could be taken, or actions could be taken, especially in these current times of crisis, to make whistleblowing more acceptable? It's to all the speakers also who wants to take the floor on this one.
I can start, Mathilde.
Yeah.
I think within a company, it's important that you push the campaign, that you use the channels that you have in your organization to align with the topics that are ongoing or what's important in your company at the moment, and be very, agile to connect to that. What we see as well is, if you want people to have no fear of retaliation and feel more comfortable to report matters, then you have to make sure that you proclaim that as well, and that you have campaigns through all the communications channels in the countries as well, and that you make sure that from a visibility perspective, not only the local organization, but also the headquarter organization, that everyone at every level of the organization make sure to communicate this kind of awareness. And that's why I think in our organization it's very important to put these topics on the business agenda. And that we also asked when, this whole situation started with COVID-19 and certain people were asked to work from home, or, there were people that there was reduced activity here and there, to make sure that the business managers were still reaching out to their teams on a weekly and bi-weekly basis to make sure that they're connected with people, that every conversation about business starts with, how are you? Any concerns? Feel free to speak up about your current situation. Acceptance of the situation as well. Babies and dogs running through the screen is not an issue these days. It's just part of life and part of how we now work. And I think that's something to show as a leader of a team. And we really try to bring that down to the level of leadership, to make sure that also in the local organizations, there is comfort of reporting. And then I think there's a lot of other options. One of my co-panelists said that, most reports are online. I think Ines, you said that. There's other options. You can have an application on a mobile phone that enables you to make a report. And I think that really brings it a lot closer and makes it a lot less scary, and entices people to make a quick, potentially anonymous report if they need to. And, we will get it accessed in the same way. It doesn't change for us, but it makes it easier for people to respond instantly to a situation and not think about, maybe they will find my email or maybe this and that. So people worry less and have better access. And I think it's a company's requirement to make sure those channels are open, that the communication and the campaigning about these topics is all in the right tone of voice, and that the business is bringing the message, not just the compliance organization.
In the United States, we've had kind of a cultural legal revolution, cultural revolution of support for whistleblowers. When I first came, they were generally considered kind of nutty or traitors to their peers. And now they're pretty much on a public pedestal. No politician has voted against whistleblower rights law for 20 years, when it's on the record at least, because of their public support. And to me, the magic word for turning these folks from pariahs into people that society values, it's like in real estate, magic words, location, location, location. For whistleblowers, it's consequences, consequences, consequences. For getting public support, it's the public realizing that these are the people who are their eyes and ears. They have the truth in a situation like this, the truth that they need to protect their families, that it's going to have a direct impact on their lives. For corporations, to think long term. Whistleblowers are, my perspective, are like the bitter pill that can keep your organization, out of trouble, and a corporation maybe out of the fiscal hospital. And a study by Kyle Welch of George Washington University really demonstrated that the corporations that have effective hotlines, like the SETS institution, they have less liability in terms of general litigation. They have fewer government penalties against them. The settlements of their disputes that do go to litigation tend to be much more modest. This is in everybody's self-interest. And it's really time to cut through the compartmentalizing and cut through the delays, and let's have a clear channel for the truth when we need it.
Thank you very much. I would like now to look a little bit beyond the crisis and to look at the future of whistleblower reporting and protection. And do you think that the increased attention that was put to whistleblower protection during the crisis will lead to reinforcement of these protections going forward, will lead to further improvements of legal frameworks, further improvements of practices, etc. So are you basically optimistic that beyond this crisis at least would have served to reinforce our system to protect whistleblowers or not? What is your position? You have the floor, whomever wants to take the floor.
Well, I can start.
Yes.
For sure, the whistleblower legislation, at least in the European countries, in the EU countries more precisely, will change and be more developed in next 2 years because we need all to transpose the EU directive. There are many countries where there are no whistleblower laws. So they will have significant changes. Countries like Latvia will have less changes because we already have the legal framework, but for sure we'll improve it. We need to add more sanctions according to the directive. For example, we don't have a sanction for revealing the identity of the whistleblower, which is a very important issue, and some more. So yes, for sure, the legislation should change, and it's an area where you don't know the answer in the beginning. I think if we would want to have a perfect law, we wouldn't still have it. I think when after 6-7 years of work, we adopted this law, it was a compromise. And said, okay, let's have it as we have at this stage. And then in 3 years, review it. And in the meantime, the directive came up. So for us, it's very clear that it's a work in progress. And we have to be modern and go, step by step in an iterative way. So I hope we'll change it. And there's more and more acceptance of this. There are whistleblowers, that people coming up, speaking up. And this is no longer a difficult issue to put through a legal change, for example. Now it's a law, and we just will go on with some changes, most probably at the end of the year.
Thank you, Ines.
During a crisis, it's a time when stagnation gets replaced by change, but it can go in either direction. And so I think that the institutions and the NGOs who support whistleblower protection, we have a real duty right now to work double time on dealing with the changes that are going to be coming out of this crisis for better or for worse. I think your question is an opportunity to alert folks to some of the efforts that are taking place. Whistleblowing International Network, which is the global coalition for whistleblower rights, has teamed up with a Blueprint for Free Speech Reform and other organizations for a global call to strengthen freedom of speech in response to this pandemic. We've got over 100 organizations on the petition so far, and you can join into the action or follow it by going to their website. The Government Accountability Project's doing the same thing in the United States with US NGOs, and we all have a duty to try and cut through the arbitrary restrictions on freedom of speech that don't make any difference to protecting our families.
Thank you. Somebody wants, Khadija? Yeah?
Yes. I think we also live in an age where we've seen that even where whistleblowers are victorious, they are still crushed as human beings. And the higher the stakes, the more the political debilitation that follows. For example, with the World Bank's Vice Integrity Presidency Office, when the person in that position challenged a massive Chinese state-owned entity, she was actually forced out because of political pressure. We see that all the time as journalists, as civil society, and we see it at the very highest levels of society. So while it does represent an opportunity to go either way, we do need to be cautious that the more so-called transparency that's implemented, it doesn't necessarily mean that there's more accountability, or that issues of national security, or that issues that really confront powerful dynamics will come to a resolution in the public interest. So we have to be very careful that a lot of paper laws, a lot of distraction, a lot of noise doesn't take our focus away from whether at the end of the day, this so-called transparency does lead to accountability, truth on the public record, and justice. Because if we actually look at the practical elements of how a whistleblower's case and life turns out, this is a very sorry situation, even where, when South Africa's state capture scandal, all of the whistleblowers on paper were victorious. In practice, they're all bankrupt, they're all unemployed, their families have been ruined, and nobody will hire them, even the so-called good corporations that on paper appear to defend them. Because at the end of the day, powerful multinationals don't want these people in their systems, where such people of conscience are ready to take on the highest levels of power. So I just want to caution that we should not be distracted by more laws without understanding the vulnerabilities and escape routes and loopholes within those laws that create the appearance of change, but is really just a ventilation that distracts us from what actually happens, and how the same people are creating more laws in their favor, but not necessarily in our favor.
Thank you very much. Now, because we have 3 minutes left, I would like to give 30 seconds to each of the panelists to say one message, maybe the most important message that you would like to convey, related, of course, to whistleblowing protection, but in these times of COVID crisis. So what would be the most single important message you would like the audience to leave us with? So please, for example, I don't know, Khadija, or maybe Lisette, because Khadija, you just spoke. Lisette, one message. What would be your most important point?
Thank you, Mathilde. I think, it's maybe a nice follow-up to the last question of how do we see the future.
Yeah.
I think within my company, I've really felt and found a big change in current situation in how strongly everyone feels about the well-being of our colleagues around the world. The amount of action that I've seen and the concerns about the health and the safety of our employees, of their families, I think it was unprecedented. I think we always cared that much, but now I could really feel it, I could see it, I could hear it in all the senior management meetings, but also on every level in the organization. And I think that's something that will be taking away as a continued process in our organization, that we see, okay, it's going to have an economical impact on everyone in this world. But one thing that's incredibly important to keep realizing is that the world is based on human beings and on human values. And I hope we will all continue on that level and making sure that that remains our top priority when we continue to interact with each other, hopefully in an environment where we no longer have to be fearful of this virus. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please keep short. Eline, the floor is yours. The last message you would like to convey?
Well, I'm going to be very brief, but what I'm hoping is this crisis is an opportunity for education about whistleblowing. And I hope that what will come out of this is more of a normalization where whistleblowers are doing the right thing. They're not villain. They're not disgruntled employees. They're doing what we're all supposed to do. They're protecting us. And I'm hoping this will help with that. And maybe in the end, one day you can be a whistleblower and still go to a large company and get a job. At that point, I think we've seen a big leap, and I'm hoping this may help with that. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Inese, 30 seconds, please.
Well, I think a very important point is to investigate the reports received from whistleblowers. Those of us who represent state institutions, I think this is of key importance, because more there will be reports that are well investigated and the problems are solved that the persons are reporting about, more we will encourage others to come forward, because they will see they make sense, that there is reaction to what they say. And those whose reports are investigated will trust more the public sector.
Thank you. Sorry, we are really like running against the clock. Tom, you have 30 seconds for your main message, please. Hello, can you hear me, Tom?
Oh.
Yeah.
Solidarity is the magic word for whistleblowers to get away with committing the truth, make a difference, and survive in the process. If they're isolated, it's very dangerous to know too much. So this is a challenge for all of our society to recognize as a basic fact of life that when we retaliate against whistleblowers, we're retaliating against all of us. That truth right now is an essential channel for long-term self-interest. In this case, it's our family's safety.
Thank you very much. And last word to Khadija. Please, Khadija.
Yes, I think that this is part of a bigger conversation. Whistleblowers become necessary when society is so corrupt that the laws don't protect people and only the human conscience from within the system can speak out. So we need transnational frameworks, political asylum, and a support fund, and a really, very strong cross-border investigative media, because at the end of the day, crime and corruption is transnational, whereas whistleblower laws are limited to national laws.
Thank you very much to all of you. I think we have had a very interesting conversation with different, environment, contexts, and a lot of experience around the table from the public sector, from the private sector, from the civil society. It has been very interesting. I thank you all, the panelists, for your experience, for sharing your views. My colleagues, Leah Ambler, Daisy, will put together a paper based on this discussion so that we could keep with us the main lessons from this discussion. It will be available in the coming weeks. So I would like to thank you all, the panelists first, of course, my colleagues who have put this panel together, and all the audience for their interesting question. I'm sorry we cannot raise all your questions because there were too many of them, but I hope that at least with the ground that we have covered in this discussion, you could get definitely food for thought. And I hope that we'll get out of this COVID crisis first healthy, but secondly with stronger system to protect whistleblower. You know that at the OECD, this issue has been selected as one of the main priorities when we will revise our recommendation on anti-bribery, and this will be done in the months to come. So it's very important that we get your input into this discussion. Some of you were calling from an international framework to protect whistleblowers. I mean, the OECD recommendation will be part of this international framework. So with this, I would like to thank the panelists again and thank you for joining us for one of these webinars that is part of our 8th Global Forum of Integrity and Anti-Corruption. There will be a series of such webinars going forward. So please look at our agenda and join us again in the coming weeks. Thank you very much. Goodbye.